When Imani Uwais slowly opened her eyes, everything felt heavy. Her head hurt, her ribs burned with every breath, and the bright hospital lights above her made it hard to focus. The last thing she remembered was driving home through the busy streets of Kigali after finishing a long day at work. Then came the sound of screeching tires, a loud crash, and nothing. Now, she was lying in a hospital bed with bandages around her arm and shoulder. A machine beside her beeped steadily, reminding her that she was alive. The doctor later told her she had been lucky. The accident could have been much worse, but she would need weeks to recover. Every time the hospital room door opened, Imani quickly looked up, her heart filled with hope. Maybe Mom is here. A few minutes later, she thought, maybe Dad had trouble finding the room. But each time, it was only a nurse checking her medicine, a cleaner mopping the floor, or another patient being taken down the hallway. The first day passed, then the second, then the third. She kept telling herself there had to be a reason. Maybe her parents were worried. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they were coming tomorrow. One quiet afternoon, while she pretended to be asleep, she heard two nurses talking softly outside her room. Her parents called earlier, one nurse said. Did they say they were coming? The other asked. The first nurse shook her head. No, they only wanted to ask about the insurance paperwork and who would be paying the hospital bill. After that, they thanked me and ended the call. Imani felt her chest tighten. She stared at the ceiling as tears slowly rolled down her face. They knew where she was. They knew she had survived a serious accident, yet they had not even come to see if she was okay. The room suddenly felt much bigger and much colder. For the first time in her life, Imani stopped making excuses for her. She realized she wasn't waiting for people who were delayed. She was waiting for people who had simply chosen not to come. Lying alone in her hospital bed, Imani couldn't stop thinking about her life. At first, she kept asking herself the same painful question. Why didn't they come? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized this wasn't really something new. It had been happening in different ways for as long as she could remember. Growing up, Imani was always known as the good daughter. She listened, worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and never complained. If something needed to be done, everyone looked at her. If the house needed groceries, she found a way. If bills were overdue, she helped pay them. If someone in the family needed support, she was expected to step in without being asked. Her younger brother, Kwame Habimana, lived a very different life. Whenever he made a mistake, their parents rushed to protect him. If he failed an exam, they blamed the school. If he spent money carelessly, they said he was still learning. If he quit another job, they told everyone he just hadn't found the right opportunity yet. But when Imani succeeded, it was treated like it was simply expected. There were no celebrations, no proud hugs, and very few words of appreciation. The better she did, the more responsibility was placed on her shoulder. After getting her first good job, she started helping with household bills. She paid part of Kwame's school fees when money was tight. More than once, she canceled her own travel plans because the family needed financial help. She even delayed some of her own dreams so everyone else could stay comfortable. Each time she helped, she believed things would change. She thought maybe this time they would finally see how much she loved them. Maybe they would appreciate her. Maybe they would treat her like she mattered too. But lying in that quiet hospital room, with no visitors and no family by her side, the truth became impossible to ignore. Their absence wasn't a shocking mistake. It was simply the latest chapter in a lifetime of being valued for what she could do, instead of being loved for who she was. The days passed slowly, and recovery was harder than Imani had expected. Even simple things like sitting up in bed or taking a few steps left her exhausted. The pain from the accident was real, but the loneliness hurt even more. Every morning, she woke up hoping today would be different. Maybe her parents would finally walk through the door, but that moment never came. Instead, someone else showed up. Her closest friend, Amina Nyan Saba, visited almost every day. Sometimes she brought fresh fruit. Other times she came with homemade soup or a funny story to make Imani smile. On busy days, she stayed only a few minutes before going back to work. On quieter days, she sat beside the bed for hours, talking about life until they both laughed. Amina never made excuses. She simply showed up. There was also an elderly hospital volunteer named Mama Esperance Mokaman. She visited patients who didn't have many visitors, offering a warm smile, gentle words of comfort. Every afternoon, she stopped by Imani's room to ask how she was feeling. Sometimes they talked about life. Sometimes they sat together in comfortable silence. Before leaving, Mama Esperance would gently squeeze Imani's hand and remind her, "You are stronger than you know." Those small acts of kindness meant more than expensive gifts ever could. They made Imani feel seen at a time when she felt forgotten. During the long, quiet nights, when the hospital hallway became silent and only the sound of machines filled the room, Imani had plenty of time to think. She realized she had spent most of her life trying to earn love that should have been given freely. She kept working harder, giving more, sacrificing more, hoping one day her family would finally choose her. But that day had never come. As she looked out of the hospital window one evening, she made a promise to herself. She would stop chasing approval from people who had never truly valued her. If people wanted to be part of her life, they would have to meet her with the same care, respect, and love she had always given them. And if they didn't, she would finally be strong enough to let them go. After several weeks, Imani was finally strong enough to leave the hospital. Walking out of the building felt like a fresh start, but she still carried a heavy weight inside her heart. She returned to her apartment, determined to focus on healing. Deep down, part of her still hoped there had been a good reason why her parents never came. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe someone had given her the wrong information. A few days later, one of her older cousins came to visit. As they talked, the conversation slowly turned to her family. Without realizing how painful the truth would be, her cousin casually said, "Your parents were so busy with Kwame's wedding preparation. There was something to do every single day." Imani looked up in surprise. "My brother's wedding?" she asked quietly. Her cousin nodded. Yes, they were meeting vendors, choosing decorations, visiting venues, and welcoming. Everyone said the wedding had to be perfect. Imani felt her stomach sink. "So, they knew I was in the hospital?" "Of course they knew," her cousin replied. "They just kept saying you were strong enough to manage on your own. They believed you would understand." Those words stayed in Imani's mind long after her cousin left. Strong enough to manage alone. She had heard those words in different ways her whole life. Whenever the family needed help, she was expected to be strong. Whenever someone else needed attention, she was expected to understand. Somehow, being responsible had become the reason she was always left behind. The truth hurt more than the broken bones from the accident. It wasn't that her parents couldn't visit her. It was that they had chosen not to. That night, Imani stopped waiting for an apology that might never. She didn't call them to argue. She didn't send angry messages. She didn't try to make them feel guilty. Instead, she quietly accepted the truth. From that day forward, she began protecting her heart. She kept conversations with her parents short and polite, but she no longer shared every part of her life with them. Instead of spending her energy trying to win their love, she poured it into rebuilding herself, one step at a time. For the first time, Imani decided that her own healing would come before everyone else's. The months after the accident changed Imani's life in ways she never expected. At first, healing felt slow. Some days her body still ached, and some memories of the accident came back without warning. But little by little, she became stronger. She realized that recovering wasn't only about healing broken bones. It was also about healing a heart that had spent years carrying other people's burdens. One of the best decisions she made was starting therapy. At first, she wasn't sure it would help. Talking about her feelings felt uncomfortable because she had always been the one solving everyone else's problems. But with each session, she began to understand something important. She wasn't responsible for fixing every problem in her family. She deserved the same care and kindness she had always given to others. As her confidence returned, she threw herself into her work. Before the accident, she had already built a respected healthcare consulting business. Now she focused on growing it even further. She worked with hospitals, clinics, and health organizations, helping them improve their services and care for patients. Soon, her business expanded beyond Kigali into Kampala, Uganda. New clients trusted her. Her team grew, and exciting opportunities kept coming her way. For the first time in years, Imani was building a life that belonged to her. She traveled for work, met inspiring people, and celebrated achievements she had once put aside while taking care of everyone else. Her relationship with her parents also changed. She didn't cut them out of her life completely, but she stopped trying so hard to earn their love. When they called, she answered politely. During family gatherings, she treated everyone with respect. But she no longer shared every detail of her life or rushed to solve every family problem. A quiet distance had replaced the constant pressure she once felt. At first, that distance felt strange. It began to feel peaceful. For the first time, Her days were no longer filled with guilt, worry, or endless responsibility. Instead, they were filled with purpose, hope, and a calm she had never known before. Imani finally understood that choosing herself wasn't selfish. Sometimes it was the healthiest decision a person could ever make. Life had finally started to feel peaceful. Imani was busy growing her business, spending time with people who truly cared about her, and continuing her therapy. For the first time in years, she wasn't waking up every day worried about solving someone else's problems. Then, one morning, everything changed. When she picked up her phone after a meeting, she froze. There were more than 20 missed calls. Most of them were from her mother and father. A few were from her aunts, uncles, and even cousins who rarely contacted her. Before she could decide what to do, her phone started ringing again. It was her mother. Imani took a deep breath before answering. "Hello." On the other end, her mother's voice was shaky and full of panic. "Imani, thank goodness you answered. We really need your help." Imani listened quietly. Her mother explained that Kwame had recently started a new business soon after his expensive wedding. Everyone in the family believed it would be successful, so they had encouraged him to dream big. He rented an expensive office, bought costly equipment, and borrowed a large amount of money. But things had gone terribly wrong. The business had failed within months. Customers never came as expected, bills kept growing, and now creditors were demanding immediate payment. They were calling every day and threatening legal action if the debt wasn't cleared soon. Then her father took the phone. "You've always helped this family," he said. "You're the only one who can save us now." Imani closed her eyes. Those words sounded painfully familiar. Not once during the conversation did anyone ask how she was feeling. No one mentioned the weeks she had spent alone, and no one apologized for choosing not to visit her after the accident. The only reason they had called was because they needed something. As the conversation continued, her parents spoke as if the answer was already decided. They expected her to pay the debt, just as she had solved so many family problems. In their minds, this was simply what Imani always did. But this time, something inside her had changed. She stayed calm, listened without interrupting, and ended the call by saying only one sentence. "I'll think about it." For the first time in her life, the family's favorite problem solver was no longer ready to rescue everyone at the cost of herself. A few days later, Imani drove to her parents' house. During the entire drive, she stayed calm. She wasn't going there to argue or embarrass anyone. She simply wanted to hear what they had to say before making her decision. As soon as she walked through the front door, everyone smiled with her. Her parents, Kwame, his wife, and a few close relatives were already waiting in the living room. They greeted her warmly, offered her a seat, and quickly began talking about the family's financial crisis. Kwame looked worried. "I made some bad decisions," he admitted. "I borrowed too much money, and now everything has fallen apart. I don't know what to do." Before he could say anything else, Imani's father leaned forward. "We know this is a lot to ask," he said, "but you've always been the one who helps this family. We believe you'll help us again." Everyone in the room looked at Imani, expecting her to open her handbag, take out her checkbook, and solve the problem just like she had done so many times before. Instead, she quietly folded her hands and looked around the room. "I want to ask all of you one question," she said softly. The room became silent. "When I was lying in a hospital bed after my accident, how many of you came to see me?" No one answered. Imani continued, her voice calm but steady. "I spent days waiting for my parents to walk through that hospital door. I kept thinking maybe tomorrow would be the day, but tomorrow never came." Her mother looked down at the floor. Finally, her father spoke. "We were under a lot of stress because of Kwame's wedding," he said. "There were so many responsibilities. We believed you were strong enough to manage." Her mother quickly added, "We knew you would understand. You've always been independent." Imani gave a small, sad smile. So planning a wedding was more important than visiting your daughter after a serious car accident? No one had an answer. The excuses kept coming. They talked about being busy, feeling overwhelmed, and believing she was safe because doctors were taking care of her. But with every explanation, they only revealed the same painful truth Imani had lived with for years. Whenever it came to choosing between their two children, Kwame was always first, and Imani was simply expected to understand. The room stayed quiet for several moments. Everyone waited for Imani to become emotional, raise her voice, or finally give in like she always had before. But she did none of those things. She took a slow breath and spoke calmly. "I didn't come here to fight with anyone," she said. "I'm also not here to punish you. But I'm no longer going to solve problems that I didn't create." Her words surprised everyone. Then she turned toward Kwame. I know you're going through a difficult time, and I truly hope you recover from this. But paying your debts is not my responsibility. Kwame looked shocked. So, you're just going to leave us like this? He asked. Imani gently shook her head. No, I'm willing to help in ways that actually lead to a real solution. She opened her notebook and began explaining her ideas. She recommended speaking with a professional debt counselor who could help create a repayment plan. She suggested meeting with a lawyer to understand their legal rights before making any rush decision. She also advised Kwame to sell expensive items he no longer needed and reduce his lifestyle until he was financially stable again. I'll even help you organize your finances, she said. I can look over your budget, explain your options, and help you make a plan. But I will not give you money. The room fell completely silent. Her parents stared at her as if they didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of them. For years, guilt had always worked. A few sad words or emotional pressure had been enough to make Imani sacrifice her own needs for the family. This time it didn't. Her mother quietly said, I never thought you would refuse us. Imani looked at her with kindness, not anger. I'm not refusing to care, she replied. I'm refusing to keep repeating the same unhealthy pattern. No one argued after that. For the first time, her family realized something had changed. They could no longer control Imani by making her feel guilty. She had learned the difference between helping someone and carrying their entire life on her shoulders. And she had finally chosen peace over pressure. After the family meeting, life became difficult for everyone. At first, Imani's parents believed she would change her mind after a few days. They expected her to call and offer the money like she had done so many times before. But the call never came. For the first time, the family had to face the consequences of their own decision. Kwame had no choice but to deal with the financial problems himself. It wasn't easy. He sold his expensive car, expensive watches, and other luxury items he had bought when he believed his business would be successful. He moved into a smaller home, cut unnecessary spending, and worked with a financial advisor to create a plan for paying back his debts little by little. The process was painful and sometimes embarrassing, but it taught him lessons he had never learned before. Instead of expecting someone else to rescue, he slowly began taking responsibility for his own choices. He found a regular job while rebuilding his business more carefully. And for the first time, he understood the true value of earning back stability through hard work. Their parents also began to see things differently. The house felt quieter without Imani constantly solving every problem. They started remembering all the times she had paid bills, sacrificed her own plan, and carried responsibilities that should never have belonged to one person. They realized they had praised Kwame for small achievements while expecting Imani to give endlessly without asking for anything. And one afternoon, an aunt visited Imani at her office. She looked uncomfortable as she spoke. I owe you an apology, she said softly. We all saw how much you did for the family, but we never stopped to ask how much it was costing. We thought you were simply strong enough to handle everything. A few other relatives reached out over the following weeks with similar work. They admitted they had noticed the favoritism, but had stayed silent for years. Those apologies couldn't erase the past, but they reminded Imani that sometimes people only recognize someone's sacrifices after they are no longer willing to. And while her family's journey was far from over, it had finally begun with something they had avoided for years. The truth. A year later, Imani stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sunset over Kigali. Life looked very different now. Her healthcare consulting business was growing. She had a team she trusted, and she spent her free time with friends who had stood beside her during the hardest days of her life. Amina and Mama Esperance were still a big part of her life, reminding her that real family is made up of the people who truly show up when you need them. Her relationship with her parents remained polite, but it was no longer built on guilt or endless sacrifice. She no longer felt the need to prove her value by fixing every problem they faced. Instead, she protected her peace and focused on building a life that made her happy. Looking back, Imani realized that the biggest victory was never about refusing to give. It was about refusing to abandon herself. For the first time, she understood that her worth had never depended on her family's approval. She was enough simply because she was herself. As people heard her story, many young African women reached out to thank her. They said her journey gave them the courage to stop carrying responsibilities that didn't belong to them, to set healthy boundaries, and to value themselves without feeling guilt. Imani smiled every time she heard those stories. She had learned one simple but powerful lesson that changed her life forever. Real love is not proven by promises or words. Real love is shown through actions. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose your own peace.